The Endless Watch? By Clownmask. A man named Ryan, an ambitious photographer, had been looking for his big break. He'd heard rumors of a haunted mansion deep in the woods, an abandoned estate that no one dared to explore. The stories said the house was cursed, and anyone who ventured inside was never the same. But Ryan wasn't afraid. He saw this as the perfect opportunity to get the photographs that would make him famous. One cold night, he ventured to the mansion. The house looked ancient, its windows like empty eyes watching him. The front door creaked open, as if inviting him in. As he stepped inside, the air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the soft click of his camera's shutter. He wandered through the darkened halls, snapping photos of cracked walls, dusty furniture, and forgotten portraits that seemed to watch him from the shadows. Scream un cariño minma, riponica. Then he found the staircase, leading down to the basement. His curiosity got the better of him, and he descended, his flashlight flickering in the oppressive dark. As his light swept across the room, he spotted a large, ornate mirror at the far end. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its frame was intricately carved, but the glass was clouded and cracked. Still, something about it drew him in. He approached the mirror and raised his camera. As he focused the lens, he noticed something strange. His reflection was distorted, but it wasn't just that. In the reflection, there was a figure standing behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. His heart raced, and he turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, now closer, its face pale, eyes hollow and empty. Ryan felt his breath catch in his throat. The reflection seemed to smile, but Ryan didn't. Suddenly, the figure moved, but this time, it wasn't in the mirror. It was standing right in front of him. Ryan stumbled back, dropping his camera, but the figure grabbed him, its cold fingers digging into his arm. The figure's voice was barely a whisper, but Ryan heard it clearly. "You took my place." The room spun, and Ryan felt his vision blur. He fought to break free, but his body was weakening, sinking into the floor. The last thing he saw was the mirror, now reflecting him standing where the figure had been. His own face twisted into that same hollow, empty expression. When the police arrived days later, they found the mansion abandoned, untouched. There was no sign of Ryan, except for the photographs he'd taken. In every photo, the same reflection appeared. A man standing alone, in the same cold, empty house. Except in the final photo, there was something new. A figure standing behind him, smiling. Here's the twist. Ryan wasn't taken by a ghost, a spirit, or a curse. He became part of the mirror. He wasn't just reflecting the figure, he became the reflection, trapped forever in the glass, doomed to watch the next curious soul wander into the mansion. And the next photographer, eager for fame, would see his image staring back from the dark, wondering who he was, until it was too late. Months passed since Ryan's disappearance, and the mansion remained undisturbed, its dark presence looming over the woods. But the legend grew, as all legends do. Photographers, urban explorers, and thrill-seekers came and went, each trying to capture the mystery of the mansion through their lenses. Some returned with wild stories. Others vanished like Ryan had. But none dared to speak of the mirror in the basement until one fateful evening, a new visitor arrived. Tessa, an ambitious young journalist who had heard of the mansion's cursed reputation. She wasn't one for superstition. If she could uncover the truth, she would finally make her name. Tessa arrived with her camera in hand, determined to document everything. The mansion seemed even more sinister under the moonlight, its crumbling exterior almost like a grotesque invitation. She stepped through the broken door, the silence pressing in on her, making her skin crawl. She could feel the eyes of the house on her, but she pushed forward. Room after room she explored, snapping photos of every corner of the mansion. The shadows grew longer, colder, but she was undeterred. It wasn't until she reached the basement door that the air grew thick with dread. The basement door creaked open, and a heavy chill poured from the darkness within. Tessa hesitated for only a moment before descending the stairs. Her flashlight flickered, and the faint scent of decay filled her nostrils. At the far end of the room, the mirror awaited her, unmoved, just as Ryan had described it. Its cracked surface glistened faintly in the dim light. Her heart skipped. She stepped closer, the mirror's reflection distorted but hauntingly familiar. Something stirred in her chest, a deep sense of déjà vu, as if she had seen this moment before. Her breath caught as her flashlight illuminated the mirror's surface. There was a figure standing behind her. Tessa spun around. There was no one. Her pulse quickened as she turned back to the mirror. The figure was now closer, its face so pale, its eyes sunken and hollow. It was Ryan. But it wasn't just his face that sent chills down her spine. There was something wrong with his eyes, something alive about them, like they were watching her, following her every move. Tessa's heart raced as she felt a cold hand brush her shoulder. She turned, her hand instinctively reaching for her camera. She snapped a picture. Click. In the photo, the figure was right behind her, but in the reflection, it was her, standing alone, smiling. Her own reflection had taken on a sinister twist, her face stretching into a grin she didn't recognize. Panicked, Tessa backed away, but the mirror seemed to pull her in, its surface rippling like water. The figure's hollow eyes filled with an unspoken warning. "Don't. Stay. Away," it whispered, its voice now unmistakably Ryan's. But it was too late. Tessa felt the pull, like gravity itself was changing, dragging her toward the mirror. Her body jerked forward, and she could feel her limbs grow heavier, colder, her vision blurred. She reached for the edges of the mirror, trying to break free, but her hands passed through, her fingers sinking into the glass like it was made of liquid. And then, in the reflection, she saw herself, but not entirely. Her face twisted, her body distorting as if trying to break free from its reflection. Her voice, no longer her own, echoed in the air. "You took my place." Tissa's scream filled the basement, but it was drowned out by a haunting chorus. From the cracks of the mirror she could hear the voices of those who had come before her. Brian, others, all trapped in the glass, their forms endlessly shifting, their voices merging into one. And as Tessa's reflection settled into the frame, her image was absorbed into the surface, her form twisting, warping, becoming part of the reflection. She became the next figure, silent, waiting for the next fool to wander into the basement. The final twist, days later, a group of explorers found their way into the mansion. They took their photos, just like all the others. But one photo stood out. In the reflection of the basement mirror, there was a new face staring back at them. Not just anyone's face, though, it was theirs. As they looked at each other in horror, they realized the truth of the mirror. It didn't just trap you, it showed you the face of everyone who would come after you. The figures inside the glass were never truly gone. They were waiting for their turn to pull you in, to replace you, so the cycle could start anew. Ik van Valaren Ovarigi Meshola. And as the group stared into the mirror, they saw Tessa's face staring back, her eyes empty, her smile wide. The whispers began again. As the explorers stood frozen before the mirror, they felt something strange in the air. The temperature plummeted, their breaths came out in clouds of vapor, even though it was far from cold. The whispers in the room had grown louder, almost deafening now, filling their minds with static, like 1,000 voices merging into one agonizing roar. Finally, separateness awake. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just staring back at them, it was moving, twitching, shifting, almost as though it was alive. One of them, a young woman named Clara, felt her chest tighten. She stumbled back, clutching her throat as if she were choking. Her skin turned pale, her lips blue, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the glass. Her companion screamed at her to move, but Clara was rooted in place, as if the mirror had bound her to it. Then, in a horrific, unnatural motion, the reflection of her face began to stretch, like someone pulling at the skin. It widened grotesquely, her eyes growing larger, her mouth splitting open, teeth elongating until her face resembled a distorted, monstrous version of itself. The real Clara screamed, but the reflection kept smiling. The other Clara, the one in the mirror, reached out of the glass, her fingers sliding through the surface like the liquid boundary was nothing. Clara felt a cold, slimy hand wrap around her throat. She tried to scream again, but her voice cracked into a horrific wheeze. Her eyes bulged, and she struggled, clawing at her own neck. But then, the twist came. Clara felt herself pulling toward the mirror, her body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. She tried to push away, but her arms were no longer obeying her. Her joints creaked, her skin pulled tight, and her body began to invert. Inside her chest, something cracked, something snapped. And then, her reflection stepped forward out of the glass. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was her. Her real body, still locked in place, began to wither, its skin shriveling like paper left in the sun. Her eyes rolled back into her skull, and her mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. Her body continued to decay, to decompose. As the reflection in the mirror, now her, stepped fully out into the room, the figure that had once been Clara began to laugh, the sound hollow and rasping, as if something ancient and evil were possessing it. But this new Clara wasn't human anymore. It was something darker, something twisted beyond recognition. The explorers watched in horror as the body of the real Clara turned to dust in the blink of an eye, like the remnants of a forgotten soul erased from existence. The explorers watched in horror as the body of a real Clara turned to dust in their hands, their bodies frozen to the spot, the only sign there was something missing. Now, the group was facing the real horror. The mirror had taken Clara, just as it had taken everyone before her, but it didn't stop there. The figure that had become Clara turned its gaze to the rest of them, its empty eyes burning with the hunger of countless souls trapped in the mirror. "Your turn," the figure rasped. One of the explorers tried to run, but his legs gave out. He crumpled to the floor, his stomach twisting in agony. He screamed, but it wasn't his voice, it was the voice of someone else. Someone who had already been swallowed by the house, trapped in the glass. The others didn't stand a chance. The mirror began to ripple, the surface distorting like water. Each of the explorers felt their skin crawl, their minds unraveling. They began to hear it, the growing chorus of voices, the ones trapped in the glass, calling to them. Pasur el foot, and then it happened. The mirror opened wide, like a maw, and from it a black, oozing mass poured out, covering the floor. It spread quickly, coating their feet, pulling at their legs with a sickening suction. The mass was alive. Alive with the souls of the cursed, the ones who had come before, their pain, their terror, all coiling into a singular entity. One by one, the explorers were swallowed by the mass, their bodies sinking into it, their faces contorted in sheer agony. As they were consumed, their screams echoed through the room, merging with the voices of the countless others trapped in the mirror. But the worst part, the truly sickening part, was what happened next. As their bodies dissolved into the mass, they began to merge with the figures in the mirror. Their faces appeared, distorted and twitching, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. The explorers didn't just die, they became part of the reflection, trapped forever, unable to move, unable to escape. And as the last of them was swallowed, the mirror became still, as if nothing had happened. The basement fell silent, the only sound being the faint echoing whispers of those trapped inside. The final, unsettling truth. If you had been standing at that moment, if you had dared to look into the mirror, you would have seen them, those faces. Their faces twisting, grinning, waiting. But if you looked closely enough, you would have seen something even worse. In the reflection, there was someone else. Someone watching you, and the worst part? You wouldn't even know when it happened. Slowly, insidiously, your reflection would begin to shift. Your own body turning against you. You'd feel yourself drawn toward the mirror, your own limbs betraying you. Your fingers reaching out to touch the glass. And as you gazed into the reflection, you would realize the terrible truth. You, too, were already trapped. Your scream would be swallowed by the mirror. Your face would become twisted, distorted, replaced. And then, a new face would appear. someone else, gazing back at the glass. The cycle would continue. But no one would ever know.